The NFL draft is in the rear mirror, and there are so many situations to figure out for fantasy football in 2025 and beyond. Tonight, myself, Tyler, Rich, all three of us, we're going to dive into all of it. Whether you're playing Dynasty, redraft, whether you've got rookie drafts going on right now, no matter what it is, we're going to try and cover every single topic we can think of and help you get set to win in 2025. So we're going to start with one of the players who I was most interested in because I put together the show sheet, so I'm going to control the flow of this to start. But it is Ted McMillan, who got similar kind of draft capital to where we saw Drake London go a few years ago. The wide receiver landscape looked kind of like all over the place in the build up to this draft. But then McMillan goes where he is. Our friend of the channel, Dwayne McFarlane, compared Ted McMillan to the way that Drake London plays. And now we've got Tet going with an ADP of 40 currently on Underdog, wide receiver one in most rookie drafts. On Underdog, he's kind of going in that same range as Xavier Worthy and Devonta Smith. Rich, would you be happy taking him in that kind of price range with an ADP of 40 in redraft, knowing what you know about him coming from the dynasty side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is a guy that the biggest question on rookies is almost bankable volume, isn't it, to begin with? And I think that he's going to walk in and get significant bankable volume from day one. Do I have some questions about upside? Maybe. I don't know if he's got, league winning top 6 wide receiver upside that some of the other rookies we've seen in past years have. But this is a guy that if you told me was, wide receiver 15 at the end of the year, I'd absolutely believe it. I think he's going to see probably north of 100, if not 120 targets. And at that point, it feels well worth a kind of 4th round pick.
Yeah, and I kind of maintain that he's landing in a really good spot because, Dave Canales has made a lot of good things happen with not, a ton of talent. We've seen a breakout from an undrafted free agent in Jalen Coker. We know Canales uses guys to their strengths. So taking a guy top 8, it doesn't make sense to not utilize him in the fullest of his abilities. Adam Thielen was kind of thinking about retirement. Today he's in the news talking about, I agree with my family to play this season, but we'll evaluate the end of the season. That's the type of guy that does not need to stand in the way of a breakout rookie coming into his own. And I fully expect Ted to be utilized all over the formation, both on the boundary and in the slot, for him to truly give this team the explosive ability in his size. That's like a power slot that he would use. So, Thielen operates in the slot, but again, they can move him or they can move him outside. They don't need Thielen to be the engine of this offense anymore. That can be Tet's to have. And so as far as trusting that breakout and trusting that full utilization for Tet is something I'm very bought into because this is a head coach that's offensively minded, and he has had no issues moving on to, moving away from what's not working and moving on to what is working. And kind of in a similar vein, we saw it with Brian Thomas Jr. last year, over on the Jags of, not really getting utilized all over the formation and being fed the ball until, the latter half of the season, and then, just exploding in production and usage. Kind of saw something similar with Jamar Chase, his rookie and year 2 season as they kind of moved him in and out of the slot. And we kind of saw that with the Cowboys with CeeDee Lamb, moving him into the slot, half of his snaps to really utilize him well and allow him to break out. So I think Tet is the kind of player who you can really, mismatch as an offensive weapon, having the size and having the explosive ability he has. And so you really just hope that he's coming in a lot more polished than Xavier Legette was last year, who was pretty poor, all things considered. So as long as he's, healthy for the whole camp and is able to, digest the playbook, and I have full trust that he'll at least be given the best shot to succeed, which we can't say about every player and every coaching staff.
Yeah, and I think that, look, as far as the Panthers are concerned, all that matters is Bryce Young the answer? They have to know when this season finishes is Bryce Young the long-term quarterback for the Panthers? And the way that they're going to do that is by, allowing Bryce Young to sit back in the pocket and pass the ball as much as possible. And I think that, Ted McMillan is going to be a huge part of that. So I think this offense, like you said, is going to flow through Ted McMillan. Question I've got for you though, Tyler, we talked about potential upside. I don't think he's got that elite ceiling as a fantasy option. one guy who's potentially got it is Travis Hunter, going in a similar range in ADP. If both are on the board, do you see yourself kind of drooling over and chasing that potential superstar ability of someone like Travis Hunter, potentially the safety of someone like T-Mac?
I mean, I like to try to simplify the process when I can, and Travis Hunter went much higher in the draft, and he went to an equally good, if not, potentially better offensive coaching mind. They're both coming from similar trees. We've seen guys get utilized in similar ways, fitting what they do well. And outside of Brian Thomas Jr., I think that's a slightly harder stud as far as like true ceiling, true target volume. But we have seen these modern offenses. Miami's a good example of, they've been able to consolidate all the targets and all the work to just two main guys and let those guys eat. And right now, when I look at the offense, I see role players. Britton Strange, fine enough target, but outside of Brian Thomas Jr., it's Parker Washington, it's Dimey Brown, it's maybe Gabe Davis. These are not guys that should take away from a number 2 overall player who, my biggest concern was how much is he going to, see offense. Well, he's gone to arguably one of the 2 best places to get utilized because his coach and his GM are both adamant about offense is going to be his first focus, and which makes sense. You make an organization from offensive cornerstones. They have Trevor Lawrence, they have an offensive head coach, and they need to score points. They need to win games. They need hope. And so when I look at these things, one got taken higher in the draft. One had a much more explosive, much more just like raw, untapped potential from what he can do on the boundary and in the yak game. To me, it's easy to say this was probably the better talent. The NFL told us as much, at least. There was never any worry that Hunter would fall out of the top 5. It was more about, what is the team going to do as far as a two-way player goes? We heard some whispers that Tet may fall out of the top 10, and he doesn't. But so it's like, as a talent and then offensive scheme, I have a lot less questions about the Jags than maybe I do, just because we've seen the floor for Bryce in this offense have a much lower floor than we'd like. And so, yeah, I have personally ranked Hunter slightly above Tet McMillan in my ranks. I hope to try to get as much of both of them before they both move up, because I expect both to move into the 3rd round by the end of draft summer. So trying to get both on the team when I can, because of that untapped potential and just an ability to, soak up all the targets and just make explosive plays. Because that's the other thing. Both these guys have incredible yak ability, but Hunter really does seem, if he gets to focus on offense and really hone his craft there, truly we're looking at like a Justin Jefferson type of, elite breakout. And that's exciting to chase.
So on that kind of note, Trevor Lawrence, QB19, currently an underdog. We talked about, like, he said the perfect situation for him. Rich, and we've always been Trevor Lawrence defenders, and I'm not asking you to go against that, but if things go poorly for the Jags this year, they no longer have their 1st round pick next year. They're currently projected for 7.5 wins this year, which is on the lower end of the scale. There aren't many teams with fewer expected wins than the Jags. Surely, I mean, as much as the Travis Hunter pick and having Brian Thomas Jr. there is going to look phenomenal for whoever they drop in, do you worry at all about the potential situation that if Trevor Lawrence doesn't perform well, that the Jags could just be back in a horrible space again in a year's time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm pleased that I'm not the Jags fan. I don't quite get my head around the cost to go up and acquire Travis Hunter. I think it was ludicrous, the amount they paid. I think it was really naive for a guy who is in the first couple of months of the job, really, to go and take that much of an aggressive move seems wild, because you're basically sticking your neck on the line almost immediately, which seems like crazy. But yeah, if we take all of the the cost and that side out of it, it's exciting. I'm a huge Trevor Lawrence believer. Giving him a weapon like Hunter opposite Brian Thomas is going to be phenomenal for him. But yeah, for the Jags, I don't quite understand the appeal as such.
It's a little overly fragile. I definitely would have liked to see them be more aggressive, improving a problem spot that was the offensive line. and they haven't really given themselves more outs to do that. But it does seem that they've built the offense at least to be, we can function with quick hitting, dangerous threats, and we'll figure out what the running backs can do. It does seem like the defense also didn't get a whole lot of help. So at least for fantasy purposes, it seems a bit fragile. But if it's going to look promising and they're not going to totally put themselves in the tank, it's going to be the Joe Burrow type of, we got to go score 30 every week and win on offense.
Also, let's be honest, 7 wins could win that division. So, it's not exactly like they're playing in, the AFC North or the NFC West or anything.
Yeah. And just on Trevor Lawrence, I think it's easier for me to draft him this year than it was last year. And obviously that's quite an obvious statement because now he's got Travis Hunter. But it's now that kind of thing of, it becomes much easier to look and go, there's the double stack. We know Trevor Lawrence hasn't really ever given us what we wanted from him on the ground. We've kind of wanted that 30 yards a game, which we know he's capable of, but it's never really been schemed for him. Maybe that changes, but now it's like going, okay, at the minute, you can double stack Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter and then take Trevor Lawrence down at QB 19. That's below where CJ Stroud and Jordan Love are going, for instance. We know that's the kind of range where we want those double stacks in order to really pay off rather than the skinny stacks. Speaking of CJ Stroud, though, and you mentioned it before, Rich, the Bengals kind of philosophy of we're going to go score 30 every game. Do you think that's what the Texans are just signing themselves up for? They only used 1 draft pick on an offensive lineman when many of us kind of thought after you trade Laramie Tunsil and after you make decisions that they did around their offensive line, that this draft had to just be hammer the position, take shots on it. We saw teams like the Eagles and the Ravens late on in the draft just take 2, 3, 4 shots on offensive linemen because it's such a crapshoot. But quite often, you can find a diamond in a rough. You can find a reasonable player there. And the Texans weren't interested in that. Do you have faith that they can do enough to be fantasy relevant this year when CJ Stroud has kind of always struggled a little bit to be fantasy relevant as it is?
I honestly do not understand what the Texans have done because to me, I'm all for building a strength on a strength, but the volume of bodies they threw into that wide receiver room just seems absolutely mental. It could be good for CJ Stroud, give him enough options and they're going to be playing from behind a little bit. I think the defense, they basically said defense was really good last year, so we don't need to address it. Well, defense regresses quite quickly if you're not always looking to improve it. So, the biggest concern for me is what they've done on the offensive line. The offensive line was bad last year. We've shipped out 2 of their best players. They were bad last year, but you've intentionally got worse on the offensive line. And you're basically saying schematically we'll get there, which I don't quite understand. Is this going to survive? Is this going to be a really quick hitting, short game passing offense? Well, you've got Nico Collins and you've just drafted Jaden Higgins, who, can operate underneath, but I think at his best is pushing vertically. It doesn't add up to me. I think that, it would be great to sit here and say Jaden Higgins on the outside, Nico Collins on the outside, Jalen Noel in the middle. That's, 3 elite receivers. Great. But you're going to need time to get them the ball. And I don't understand it at all.
Yeah, Tyler, but if you were to put your faith in one player, not named Nico Collins on the Texans, is it anyone? Do you think Joe Mixon can kind of overcome this crap offensive line?
Well, I would like to remind the good people that Joe Mixon was having a very good season until he was hip drop tackled into the moon. And then
No, the NFL would have punished someone for doing that.
Yeah, of course, they're the most consistent league with punishments. Plays the rest of that game, looks completely hurt, misses about 5 weeks because they also had a bye week, if I'm not mistaken, and then suffers another low to mid ankle sprain, plays essentially through it, and everyone's claiming he's old, he's dust, he's washed. Was injured twice. Outside of that, was very efficient, looked pretty good. Allowed them to be as varied as they could be, whether that was smash mouth football for better or for worse, or peppering him with targets. So and that's always been Joe Mixon's MO, is as long as he's healthy, he's more than competent, and he's got his efficient stretches. The staff has a lot of faith in him. I think they've kind of signaled with trading up for Woody Marks. It does seem like they want to make sure they have some like quick hitting outlets. But I do just want to say that, I think one of the biggest issues with the offensive line last year was that you had these talented guys in Houston, but the year over year rumor mill and issues were that Tunsil, while being one of the more talented guys, one of the more paid guys, was at the top of the list of most penalized. And so putting the offense in a lot of longer N3, longer N2 situations. They were one of the most penalized lines in the league for like 3 years in a row. So that was just putting, obvious passing down situation with even more to pick up, putting Stroud in bad situations. They weren't really taking the coaching. They weren't really improving, the issues that were causing these false starts, these neutral zone infractions and types of that. And then from that standpoint, they fire the offensive line coach. They ship out a bunch of guys. They take just one single tackle, but it was in the second round. But they also signed a bunch of, other lower end veterans. And Ryans does come from the San Francisco school where we see them every year basically kind of churn the other camp vets and waiver wires there and try to mix and match for scheme. So, and yeah, exactly. If you watched any Houston football, you remember the feeling of, oh, Nico's got a 50-yard touchdown, and it's coming back because of holding. Fun. Very cool. So, 3-4 times at least. So, all in all, to say that the talent was failing the scheme because of just penalties and coaching issues. They weren't picking up stunts. So I do think I would have liked to see a lot more talent thrown at the line, but I do think they're trying to take the approach of let's bring in a lot of dudes. Let's see who takes the coaching. Let's see who does their job and make it work. That's really only worked for the best offensive line coaches in the Eagles and, Scarnecchia of the Patriots. But Caserio does come from that Patriots side of the house. So I will be very interested to see how the line is looking in camp before I make any final judgments, because it does need a gel. They do need a tape to it. But I'm not that much of a homer. I am the first person to criticize this Houston Texans team, but I do want to leave a line on that. Maybe they got enough of the right guys to make it work. Will it be thin? Will it be fragile? Absolutely. Are most offensive lines that way? If not everybody is healthy, absolutely. And I still don't think this takes them out of the running for, making a mid-camp trade for someone on the block to just bring in. I do think this team is going to be very active in camp for filling any need. And I think who they've added at least just adds quality depth and versatility. I have questions about how Higgins and Noah will be used, but I think it's a good thing because I think they need to just see who fits best in what this does well. And if they have three solid weapons, well, that doesn't allow the defense to key on exactly what they're going to do and who they need to take out of the play. And that hopefully alleviates some of the pressure on Stroud, who for the first time is being told, you have the reins, call the plays, call the shots, make what works. And so hopefully it's just putting more on Stroud's shoulders to bear, for better or for worse. So it's a fragile situation, but I have a little bit of faith because Ryans has proved he's above average coach when it comes to the culture part of it. And that seemed to be one of the big issues for one of their most important aspects last year.
Because Rich, where are you at? So go on, Rich.
I was just going to say, because when you've got one of the most penalised offensive lines in the league, of course you want to, sign Cam Robinson because that always resolves that, doesn't it?
You got to have some depth.
I was going to say, Rich, where are you at on CJ Stroud? Because like a year ago in dynasty drafts, people were taking him ahead of the likes of Lamar Jackson, which always looked stupid. He was going, QB2 sometimes, QB3. And now he's had 2 years where he's not been particularly fantasy relevant. They tried to surround him with talent last year with Stephon Diggs. Obviously, Tank Dell got injured. Nico got injured at points. But they seem to really believe the idea that they need to surround CJ Stroud with weapons. Do you think that he could have the kind of season that gets us back to where people were a year ago?
No, because I think the hype was ridiculous. I think we do this every year where a rookie quarterback shows something. Baker Mayfield was the QB3 in Dynasty after his rookie year. Like we do this time and time again. the fancy production was never there for CJ Stroud. We just got overhyped because he looked amazing as a rookie. I think for fantasy, he's probably going to be that back end QB1, high end QB2 for the next, 10, 12 years. Like that's Dak Prescott basically is what we're saying in terms of fantasy production. For me, no, it's great. And in Superflex leagues, that's really great. But the upside's not there. He's my QB 11 in Dynasty. I'd much rather take a shot on, Kyler, Jordan Love, Drake May, guys like that I think have got higher upside than play it safe for someone like CJ Stroud.
What is it about Jordan Love that you see as higher upside compared to CJ Stroud?
I think it's an increased rushing potential and it's a willingness to push the ball downfield. Like Jordan Love is one of the craziest quarterbacks in the league in terms of there are not many people that hit the back foot and are willing to throw the ball downfield quite like he does. I love watching it. It's highly erratic, but when it pays off, it's phenomenal. And I think that he just has that higher ceiling than a rhythmical pocket passer like CJ Stroud.
And we've already seen that he's so streaky with, he's not going to hit all the time those deep passes and those deep plays, but when he does, he's breaking fantasy and being a top 5, top 3 scorer on the week. He does rush more often, and I like Ryans, but LaFleur has proven that he can mold an offense not only to who he has in tow, but who they're playing. He is a mismatch king. He prioritizes the trenches. He prioritizes having role players. And even when it's not very talented and it's not working very, very well, i.e. last year with the pass catchers, they're finding ways to make it work by utilizing Josh Jacobs, utilizing Tucker Kraft, utilizing role players like Emmanuel Wilson. So it's just like, as far as the environment they're attached to and how they've been utilized, Jordan Love is extremely volatile, but much like, some of the more volatile quarterbacks of the past, Cam Newton, when they're hot, they are scorching fantasy. And at this point, Stroud needs the type of Burrow run out where, they are passing a lot, their passing weapons are elite, and the line is sufficient enough to let him just rip it and stick it. And he's going to have a couple of those like scamper touchdowns. And that is how he's sneaking into that. And that's a lot of dominoes to hit. Whereas we've already seen Love work just because, he went from hitting none of the touchdowns with interceptions on those long passes to hitting those 30-yard touchdowns multiple times a game and rushing for, 30, 40 yards. So
Tyler, where does that leave you on Matthew Golden?
I'm having to take more shots than I'd like, simply because I'm trying to be humble about, I'm not always right about saying which rookie's going to work out year 1 or not. For every Keon Coleman that I avoid, I step on a landmine named Treylon Burks. So just remembering my own misses. At the end of the day, I don't want to get too granular because we don't know who these players are until they get into schemes. And sometimes players come into really good positions and they grow into better players. They're utilized really, really well. Or in the Tyquan Thornton scheme, this is best ball that we're playing. They just get hot at the right time because they're just explosive. Golden has proven he is explosive and he's going to be utilized in the Christian Watson role. And we've seen that have its very strong stretches. Golden, first round receiver in this role that a second round Watson was in. It's not the best price. It's not the best profile. But again, it's an offensive system that I trust to utilize players really well. And there's just a lot open for grabs. I don't expect him to be a target hog. I don't expect him to be a consistent player, but I don't have to choose when to start him in best ball. I just get to reap the benefits when he hits. And so, and there's plenty of ambiguity behind him at the receiver. You've got, Stephon Diggs at 32, returning off at ACL. You've got Emeka Egbuka, who, that's a fun player I'm sure we're going to talk about. And at least for Golden, we expect him to be playing early and often. And then, hoping he gets fed and, catches the ball when it hits his hands. And if that happens, he's one of 2 guys on the team right now that can say they can catch the ball, which is big.
So, Rich, I know you were a bit lower, obviously, in your rookie guide, which if you want a copy of that, all we've got to do is hit the join button down below, choose silver or gold tiers. And if you're already a member and not already in the Discord or got your copy, drop us a DM. We'll make sure you get it because it is an incredible resource for this time of year. And smash the like while you're down there. But, Rich, you, even with the draft capital for Matthew Golden, he didn't really stand out in your rookie model. He didn't really stand out in anything. Are you kind of quite comfortable just knowing that across your portfolio of dynasty leagues, you probably aren't going to get him because there'll be people higher on him than you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fully expecting that I'll probably have 0 shares of him in dynasty. I don't love the prospect. I don't love the player. And I think, in managed leagues where you're having to select that lineup, I just don't see him having the week-to-week consistency where you're ever comfortable putting him in a lineup. So I'm happy letting others, take the shot on it. In best ball, I like it a little bit more. I still don't love it. I'm just looking at some ranks on Underdog right now in terms of ADP. It's pretty disgusting, the range of wide receivers that he's going in amongst. You're looking at George Pickens, Jaden Reed, Stephon Diggs, as you said. That's a bunch of guys I'm not excited to draft, shall we say. The one that screams out is Brandon Ayuk. How he's going in that same range, I don't quite understand. But so yeah, I guess in best ball, I can understand taking the odd shot, but I'd probably want to be underweight on Matthew Golden just because I'm not sure I believe in it.
Yeah, okay. So we're just gonna take a break from those players for a second because one of our YouTube members, Rory, asked in our Discord earlier, are we big braining Hampton in a similar way we did Saquon last year? Round 1 capital, Greg Roman offense, surely that's a smash. Now, last year, the Chargers were ranked 16th in run offense, DVOA. They were 17th in rushing yards, but only 6 teams had a lower yards per carry than their 4.1. They weren't as impressive as they should be for a Greg Roman offense, particularly given that they've got a good offensive line. And now, obviously, Najee's there. And pre-draft Tyler, we were drafting plenty of Najee. When he fell to us, we weren't, I wouldn't say we were excited for him, but the price felt palatable and it felt okay. Are you smashing Hampton as often as possible and just kind of counting on him to have one of those classic rookie running back seasons where by week 11, by week 12, this is a 60-40 split in the favor of Hampton and he's getting the most valuable work?
I'd say yes and no, simply because, at least when drafting best ball teams, construction and other players around that it's a very important thing. So at the end of the turn, and he's going in the mid to early 40s on Underdog, half point PPR in DraftKings. I believe he's probably within 5 picks of that, if I remember correctly. Even with that being PPR scoring. But my thing with Hampton is he wasn't locked into the first round until he had just one of the best combines a running back has ever had. Just the RAS alone, the RAS on this guy, I mean, it's incredible. So, and in my head, I think if J.K. Dobbins with no ACL and Achilles was able to have a few breakaway runs and some he was a complete smash of ADP, much, much cheaper. I think the most expensive he got was in the 15th round on most sites by close. Yep. And so we're talking about a 4th or a 5th rounder in Hampton right now. But first round talent, his analytical profile from who he is athletically is just immaculate. It's incredible. Herculean, some might say. And then he's got really solid marks across the board. He's not just a plotter and he's not just a pass catcher. He's done both just fine to very well. And I look at this and I say, from a contingency standpoint, if Hampton is the full workhorse, he's a 2nd round pick easily. And so if anything happens to Najee, who's been pretty healthy, but if anything happens to him or he gets phased out, he's smashing ADP. And then even if he's not, and if he's splitting, we've seen the team kind of move away from the Gus Edwards plotting when they could. And then by letting J.K. Dobbins walk, they could have easily signed him for very cheap by applying the tender that they just applied to him. If they wanted to really play it safe, they bring in Najee, they have J.K. Dobbins, and we just say we have 2 plotters and pass catchings, whatever. We know there's pass catching role to be had with Justin Herbert and with this offense, and how strongly Hampton was talked about by Harbs and the GM about he could be a 3-down guy. He can be explosive in the pass game. He can be explosive. I think there's a chance he could be extremely efficient on limited touches, a la Breece Hall, someone that we were begging, please give this guy 20 touches. And even when he wasn't, he was having really nice spike weeks above 20 points just on explosive efficiency plays. If he's less boom bust, he gets the coaching staff's love for just being consistent. which, by all accounts, he can do. And I just think this is very strongly a guy that is likely splitting with Najee to start the season, but has every chance to just take more of the work, or at least more of the valuable work, the high value touches that we want, the stuff in the green zone, the stuff in the red zone, the stuff on third down. By all accounts, that is up for grabs, and that is already somewhere they're looking for him to be a weapon for Herbert. And then in that case, like this is a pass attack that we saw a lot more volume and efficiency out of than we thought attached to Greg Roman. And so I don't want to discount the upside.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Like, are we maybe assuming that this is still a Greg Roman offense that like concentrates on the run, or like Rich, do you think that drafting Trey Harris where they did says that they know they can't get by with just Lad McConkey in the passing game and that it's got to be more expanded?
I think, go look at the wide receiver depth chart. They needed to add somebody. I don't think this is going to be anything other than a traditional Greg Roman offense. We've got 15 years a history of him being a coordinator in the NFL, and it's never been anything different. I think we're going to establish the run and we're going to keep pounding it. And look, Trey Harris isn't going to change that. I like Trey Harris as a player, but he's not Lad McConkey 2.0. He's not a guy that's going to come in and command 140 targets. He's a vertical weapon that brings a little bit different to this offense. And he's going to stretch the seams a little bit. And I'll be honest, I don't know how much Trey Harris we're going to see to start the year. I think it's probably going to be Mike Williams to begin with until he gets injured, and then Trey Harris can come in and take over. But I really like Omarion Hampton. I think that the prospect is, very, very good. I think if we were talking about most other years, he'd be being talked about in much higher circles. It's just that we've got a truly phenomenal back going ahead of him. If this was last year, Hampton's 2-3 rounds better than Jonathan Brooks, and we'd be getting very excited about him. It's just because we've got Genty going ahead of him that we're all forgetting about him.
It's a funny thing. I look at, we like to do a little bit of pattern matching, but I would just like to remind that we saw a similar thing where like Zeke Elliott and Rico Dowdle in the Dallas backfield last year. The Dallas offense, mostly disappointing. The run game, very disappointing. But eventually, as much as the staff liked the old dusty guy that can't do anything, the other guy got work because we need to move the ball and we need explosive plays and we need a score. And eventually going to go to that guy. We've seen Najee get a forced split by a third-round running back. And I like Jalen Warren. We all like Jalen Warren. But he's not Omarion Hampton level of talented prospect based on their prospect profiles, based on where they got drafted. And that guy split, forced a 50-50, 60-40 split and supplanted Najee, who was, the PPR scam of all PPR scams with Roethlisberger his last year. And everybody's like, oh, what a pass-catching, prowess guy. No, he was utilized in every facet of the offense, but then was relegated for a better, more effective pass catcher. So from that standpoint, we see what Najee is. He's not nearly as bad as we said he was. He's not nearly as good as the Bulls thought he was. He is fine. He can do what you want him to do, but he's not why the offense is churning, and he's not. If he's the engine, you're not going very far. So as far as that's concerned, and he wasn't paid that much. It was very incentive laden.
5.25 mil.
Right. So it's like this is a fine deal. It's fine depth. It's if he's the starter, this is a guy made to keep. Ideally, I wanted Hampton's ADP to be a little bit lower. I needed some Najee FUD to get my boy in the 5th round, so I could just end up with 80% of Hampton, like I did with Breece Hall, because Dalvin Cook was definitely gonna, dust Breece Hall. So it's like I don't want to forget that we've seen situations like this before, and at this point in Najee's career, he is the stepping stone for Hampton's Herculean rise, not the block of all blocks. Because if Hampton can just be efficient on the touches he's going to get more of them. He's going to get more of the high value touches, and he can just run hot with efficiency and meet ADP at worst. But I think he's the best bet in this offense, given health, to be the back we want in the playoff weeks for these contests.
Well, sticking with running back position and guys that you kind of wanted for those points, like Chase Brown was definitely a winner coming out of draft weekend. There was plenty of expectation that the Bengals could take somebody And somebody of note, and all they took was Taj Brooks. So you look at the Bengals backfield now. Yes, we've got Zach Moss there. There's not really any kind of much been said about his health next year. Yes, we've got Samaje Perine there, but there's nobody that really concerns me. And I'm completely fine saying, all right, well, maybe Chase Brown is capped at 15 touches per game instead of the 20-25 that we see from guys like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, potentially CMC when healthy, and maybe even Bijan Robinson's getting there at times. But what we've seen from Chase Brown is that he can be so explosive, so fantastic in those situations. RB11 on underdog. Tyler, I know that you're trying to hit the Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow like double stack at the minute. Have you given any thought to trying to pull Chase Brown into those stacks and go double Chase Joe Burrow instead?
I have. I've tried to get all three. It's not the most optimal way to build, but if you have all three Bengals, you're a lot more likely to maybe get that falling Burrow. Sneak peek, guys. I heard the ETR has Burrow ranked at 68. So directionally accurate. This is where the ADP will end up because that's where the ranks are headed. So quit taking him in the fourth round. You sheep. No, but no. So I have taken a little bit of that. I still have a weird feeling with Chase because I don't disagree at all. He came out very unscathed. So from that standpoint, he probably should be going a little bit higher. That said, I don't want to discount everything that the staff said and did last year, both splits, not just the first half, not just the second half, and then what they said coming out, which was, in a perfect world, we don't want Chase Brown to be the guy we utilize in all the capacity. And then I believe it was Chris from Fantasy Points wrote an awesome article highlighting every team, and I wanted to see what he had to say about the Bengals and Chase Brown because I want to try to measure my take that I think he's a good player. I think he's explosive. I still think his touch ceiling is capped. In a perfect world, they don't want to utilize him like the Kyren Williams, 90% snaps that they want to. Can they afford to? These are the questions we ask. But he ran really, really hot on design rushes, and his design targets and his target share still wasn't as strong as we would have liked. So maybe a little bit fragile like the Kyren, where it's like, man, if he just got a few more targets per game, this would be a much stronger profile. So I still feel that way where he's a fine to solid target. It's still a team that they have some weird things with how they want to split the running backs, how they want to utilize the guys. They keep saying they'd prefer him more as the first and second down guy, not as the pass catcher guy. And that's where running backs really crush, is just getting these targets, getting in the 2-minute offense. Because Moss is not gone and because they brought back Perine, who they trust, who Perine found his way onto the long down and distance 2-minute drill stuff with the Chiefs last year. I put my hands up, Pacheco injury, blah, blah, blah. But there were just a little bit of thorn annoyances here that if he gets chased up into the second round, no pun intended, I don't know how interested I am based on some of these other guys that have much stronger total touch shares. All that said, it's still an offense I want pieces of because I feel very strongly that this offense is going to score a lot of points. And if any guy misses any time, the other guys, much like other offense we've seen, condense around them. So I don't want to get too granular and outsmart myself. I do just want to be a little measured that he's not, I don't know if he's the smash of all smashes because, if they get their way, they kind of measure and control the touches and how they're allocated. But we've seen that when it hits the fan, they will just give him all the work. We kind of seen that with Kyren where, hey, in a perfect world, Cora mixes in, and then a not perfect world happens and Kyren gets all the work.
I'm a little bit concerned about Samaje Perine being added in, I have to admit, because as you said, they keep talking about him being an early down back, and they seem to want to take that receiving part away from him, and that's what I'm worried about with Samaje Perine. We know he's one of the best pass protecting backs in the league, and if we even see, 20-30% reduction in those passing snaps, that makes an impact, and that takes, Chase Brown from being a potentially top 6 back to that kind of back end RB1, high end RB2 that isn't as intriguing to be, as you say, chasing up into the second round.
Yeah, the stat that I thought was most interesting that Chris shared was that despite running the second highest route snap share, he had the 15th and 17th designed in target share. So it's like he's running the routes, but they're not targeting like that. They just don't they're not utilizing him like that. They just don't like him like that. So that's
because you've got Jamar Chase, who
why would you?
is.
Yeah.
But if you're scheming up manufactured touches, and I know I bang on about manufactured touches, who do you want those balls going to other than Jamar Chase? Like, he's one of the freakiest after the catch players in the entire league. And if you're dropping back to throw, do you really want to check down to Chase Brown when you can try and force balls to someone like T. Higgins? Like, it doesn't make sense to manufacture those balls going towards Chase Brown. So yeah, I fully agree with you there, Tyler.
And Gesicki being re-signed, Gesicki's ADOT.
With the whole offense, like, it's just like they ran it all back, and it's kind of, sorry to interrupt you, but like, it feels like that the Bengals know exactly what they're going to be this year, and we can have confidence in where we're going to draft them, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that kind of just saps Chase Brown's total upside from the target share side of the world is that they also reduced Gesicki's ADOT last year. So he kind of operated as this very like quick, short ADOT hitting outlet. So instead of hitting the running back in the outlet game, they're hitting Mike Gesicki with like a 7.5 ADOT. So it's like, hey, if Chase and Higgins aren't open, Gesicki's likely open, hit him. They're rarely getting to the point where Chase Brown is the outlet. And so at that point, yeah, he becomes a little bit more touchdown dependent on a team that still, Chase Goodberry did this for every single team. He's the Bengals guy I trust and I talk to. He also shared going into the draft that he wasn't sure that Chase Brown was going to be able to kind of match the elite running backs in fantasy without just like a super hot touch run like he did last year in the second half of the season. But he denoted that they had the Bengals had one of the worst graded drafts when you look at all the reaches versus fallers versus quality guys. And they came out of free agency in the draft, much like the Texans, really disappointing allocation to a very concerning offensive line. And so from that standpoint, you're wanting Chase to hit like touch totals and efficiency that's going to keep his price high and doing well. And I just have concerns about how good that run and pass block unit is going to be, and then what his total touches are going to be outside of just rushes. Those are enough questions where I know it's a third-round pick. It was a little bit more comfortable to say, ahead of James Cook in the fourth round. But now that you've got to take him over Breece Hampton and and potentially some of these other rising backs, I don't know how much more I like him versus 3 rounds later in the Kamaras, Walkers, Harveys, and the other cheaper rookies. There's a little bit of fragility there that I have a little bit of hesitance because there are some really solid receivers like Devontae Adams who, in their perfect seasons, provide just nuclear upsides that I'd like to chase.
Yeah, well, one team which is probably going to struggle with upside this year is the Browns. Obviously, the quarterback situation is what everybody's been talking about. Are we going to see Joe Flacco at the start of the year? Do we see both Dylan Gabriel? Do we see Shadur Sanders? Who starts? Who ends up with the majority of starts through the season? But is the takeaway from this not the wide receiver room should be one which we're actually a little more interested again? We saw Cedric Tillman have a really good flash mid-season last year before he dealt with injuries. Jerry Jeudy finished the season incredibly strong. Rich, do you think those guys are kind of sneaky dynasty buys right now, or do you think that the quarterback situation is so prohibitive that it's a problem? Or are you kind of looking a year from now and going, okay, well, they've got the Jags first, which we talked about already, could be quite high. That's the point where they can get away from Deshaun Watson money. And is that the point where they go out and draft one of these upcoming quarterbacks in a class which is supposed to be better? And should we be buying assets that we expect to stick around in that offense for next year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't need to threaten me with a good time with Cedric Tillman. I've been a fan since before he came out, and what I saw last year, I'm very intrigued by. Next year's quarterback class, I did some work on it today, and I'm pretty much in. It looks very good. I don't know if there's a true transcendent superstar, but I think there's 4 or 5 guys that are going to go in the first round and be very competent NFL starters. And I think one of those is going to end up on the Browns because I think they're going to be terrible this year. So, if you can buy pieces that you think are going to be around longer term, and Cedric Tillman's still got some life left on his rookie contract. So, I'm very intrigued on that. Judy, it's all about price for me. I don't love the player. I think he show over dough. I think he does a lot of flashy stuff, but I think for me, I'm likely to be underweight and feel like he's overpriced because I think people are chasing the upside of what he put up in, let's be honest, a Jameis Winston-led offense, which is basically not real NFL offense, is it, when it comes to fantasy?
Yeah, and we've got Fantasy Dog in the comments saying Sanders will start if Flacco fails, and obvious. Well, yeah, to an extent it is, but I also think that we just have to assume Sanders is going to start a lengthy amount of games or get an opportunity to do so, because everything about the pick just screamed Jimmy Haslam. Jimmy Haslam, who came out after the Deshaun Watson stuff and said, like, I have to learn to take a step back. I have to accept responsibility for where we went wrong. And then the coaching staff clearly wanted Dylan Gabriel. And whether Sanders was a value in round 5 or not, it doesn't matter, because then you cut to them as these guys who are very specific in how they like to coach players and how they want players to respond to that. That was part of the Deshaun Watson failings, is that he just wasn't able to be coached in the same way that they liked. And now you've got Shedeur Sanders, who the one knock against him seems consistently to be those kind of like mental side and like how he acts off the field. So Tyler, like, do you think that Shedeur Sanders, like coming into this, having been humbled a bit and falling to the 5th round, is going to be good? Or do you think that this is just a situation which you'd rather avoid and instead rather load up on the running backs instead?
I think a couple things. Some of the Brown sources, like the Joe Goodberries, I believe Klevta and another source on Twitter, I enjoy. They follow and care very much about the Browns. It seems like with Harold Fannin selection, fading quarterbacks early and taking 2 running backs in the 2nd and 4th, and Dylan Sampson and Judkins signal they expect to have to kind of ball control this offense, after how they approach the draft. Instead of trading back down and potentially netting more draft capital and getting a quarterback, they settle with, defensive side of the ball instead of O-line, which was an interesting choice. So the O-line looks fragile and thin. The quarterback situation looks like a mess. To me, that signals we're going to try to run the ball, play defense, and figure out what works at quarterback. Flacco's obviously the person that they've seen work that. They've benched him previously, though. He's Icarus. He flies high and he gets burned. There's only so many, much like Jameis Winston, there's only so many interceptions you can see thrown in a game that you were controlling before the coaching staff will yank you. I think Sanders' profile being kind of like Teddy Bridgewater-esque physically, but having one of the worst pressure to sack rates, whether or not that's on him or the O-line, him falling to the 5th round tells us a lot. I think we have to adjust our priors from, they got a 1st-round talent in the 5th round to this was a 2nd-round talent at best that fell to the 5th round. Those guys are not always guaranteed to start, and they're not usually very good, history tells us. And this is a team that still has outs. Kirk Cousins is on the trading block. We've seen teams make trades for like backup quarterbacks before, do a little backup quarterback swapping. We saw it happen during the draft with Sam Howell finding a new home. So I wouldn't say this is the final QB room. And I think we're going to learn more as the team gets these guys on the field and sees what's working. If a guy had that much concern, and I don't know that Sanders gets humbled enough to start putting in the effort and winning over a staff, partially just because, like, if you knew the playbook really, that was one of the concerns with Sanders, is like this playbook and the style of offense they run is nowhere close to what they're running in the real NFL. It's so simplistic. How much can he actually pick up? So from that standpoint, I think it's Flacco, Pickett, and then everything's on the board. Rodgers could come in and decide he'd rather do this because the Steelers don't seem as interested. They could trade for Kirk Cousins, or they could just swap for a backup and make it work. It's a mess. I think you got to focus on the run game, and I agree that even in best ball, I want to be more excited about Judy, but he's like the equivalent of a Big Mac. He looks really good when other people are eating it, and then you eat it and you feel like shit. So if this offense does kind of run more 12 personnel, or they utilize Fannin more in the slot, Judy fits better in the slot. And if Flacco's not starting, the volume and the efficiency of this pass offense become really concerning. So I think it's messy. Projectably, on paper, it's going to feel fine. but we know how if it has implosion risk, it usually does implode, and that usually doesn't benefit fantasy. And so I'm very hesitant to buy into anything except for the run game. And even there, I'm worried about what the ceiling of this offense can be week in, week out.
Well, speaking of buying into it, Harry in the chat asks what price to trade for Cedric in Dynasty. Rich, in let's say Superflex, where are you going for Cedric Tillman?
So I'd happily pay a mid-second or a future second. I don't think you need to pay that right now. I think you can probably get him for 2/3. But I'm above consensus, so I'd happily pay that second round pick.
Well, there you go, Harry. We've got 10 minutes left tonight, so we're going to kind of roll through a couple more quick hitters, but I'm going to throw at you guys and give me the rookie or veteran that you're most interested that we haven't talked about so far, and I'll come to you each twice. But Rich, first up, what's the one situation we haven't talked about so far that you feel has caused the most intrigue to you post-NFL draft?
So we talk about best ball, and you guys always preach to me, upside. Let's swing for the fences. Let's chase that 100th percentile outcome, right? There's a rookie wide receiver who's maybe one of the most talented players I've ever seen with the ball in his hands, who's got one of the better offensive coordinators in the league. Has got
Isaac Tesla.
Exactly that, yeah. But Luther Burden, like I talked about it in the rookie guide. If we're talking about ranges of outcomes, I'd absolutely believe he's out of the league in 2 years. I could believe that he's the overall dynasty wide receiver 1 in 2 years. Like this guy is phenomenal, and I could believe anything. I said that he's entered the Tyson zone. Bill Simmons created the Tyson zone of you believe any story about the person. I believe any outcome when it comes to Luther Burden. So why not swing for the fences and go and take a punt at wide receiver 47 prices?
Yeah.
That feels well worth it.
I think one of the key things with Luther Burden is, did Rome Odunze really show us that much last year that warrants us assuming that Luther Burden can't jump Rome Odunze to be, if not the wide receiver 2, if not the wide receiver 1, then the wide receiver 2 in Chicago? I think that, look, I mean, we talked about it with Dwayne McFarland. There's a wide range of outcomes for Luther Burden, and that offense, which he spent in his college time in, it definitely didn't maximize everything for quarterback play, didn't necessarily help particularly. And there's plenty of question marks around Caleb Williams. But if you're talking about creative schemas, then it feels like there's definitely a world where Luther Burden is more just the coaching staff's cup of tea than Rome Odunze. Tyler, are you kind of comfortable taking Luther Burden in best ball?
Yeah, I've been taking him he goes in that ugly range we just talked about. He's like about 5 picks after the guys were like, I don't know. And if you look at me in the face and you say, who do you want? Do you want Cooper Kupp in Seattle or do you want Luther Burden in Chicago? I'll tell you, well, projectably, Cooper Kupp makes a lot of sense. But upside wise, I see the vision with Burden. And it's hard not to say that. I want to be measured because he is a second round talent. But they didn't keep Vlad McConkey from being awesome. And not every time that we identify, to your point, not every situation that we identify as ambiguous or a logjam ends up becoming that way. Talent always rises to the top. And I want to take notice, and I think that's more signal when an offensive-minded coach targets offensive guys, because they typically have a vision. We see this with McVay. They typically have a vision. They typically have a plan, and they try to get these guys in the best position to win. And it doesn't matter what round they're taken in. They get schemed, they get matched, and if they can't pop with that guy, then that's a pretty good signal that, like, okay, maybe they're not that good because they were just given every chance in their strength to do so. So from that standpoint, it's hard not to be into him because the biggest question mark was he could be Rondale Moore or he could be Justin Jefferson. It's a huge range, but we shouldn't be afraid of those range guys. We should buy into them, especially when the environment is conducive to hitting the upper range more often than the lower range. If he goes to a different team, a different coach, I definitely have more hesitancy. But he arguably goes to the best coach we could have asked for because it is a new staff, and the new staff's going to run things they want to run things with. So I'm into it.
Okay, Tyler, give us your situation that we haven't talked about yet that you're most intrigued by.
It's one everybody else is talking about, and I'm buying in is Drake May in New England. They do add Diggs, who is actually legit ahead of or on schedule. by all accounts, looking good physically from the people whose opinions I respect on how does this guy's knee look. And who wasn't all that bad, potentially miscast in Houston last year. Everybody thought he'd work on perimeter. Turns out they slotted him because Tank Dell is better on the outside. Well, I look at New England, and they need perimeter receivers. They've got 4 slot guys. So from an EPA standpoint, I think Stephon Diggs could be a value if he is truly healthy with Drake May's type of abilities. Kyle Williams, very interesting, addition to the receiver room. And Hendrickson is explosive abilities that we just didn't really see out of the running backs, especially in the pass game. So from their ability to kind of ball control and make it work, would I've loved a longer armed, less T-Rex tackle Adam in the first? Absolutely. But they needed
character.
You know what? Character is what shines through when you're getting bull rushed.
He said he's going to die for Drake May, and maybe he will end up with those short arms dying for Drake May, but it'll be entertaining anyway. But yeah, I think Drake May, what we saw from him last year was so fantastic. The big problem was just a lack of touchdowns, and we need those touchdowns to come. So, like, adding good players around him, I think it's only going to help that. I think that as an offense, if you can stay on the field more often, then you're going to score more points. So none of that makes me have any concern drafting him this year. Rich, one more situation from yourself that we haven't talked about tonight that kind of like is affecting how you're feeling about the fantasy landscape at the minute.
Yeah, so I know Tyler's a huge fan of Coach Speak and listening to what they're telling us. Well, when a Hall of Fame head coach comes out and compares a 3rd round pick wide receiver to one of the best receivers he's coached, I'm intrigued. So yeah, Pat Bryant, 201st overall on Underdog, feels like he's basically free. Look, if you could say, if a coach could come out and say he reminds me a lot of Michael Thomas, I'm going to pay attention. I'm not the biggest fan of him as a prospect. I think there's some holes in the game, but as a power slot, I think he's going to come in and take over from Devon Vele almost immediately. And I think that's a really intriguing offense that we know Bo Nix likes spamming stuff underneath. And I think that Pat Bryant could walk into a really, really heavy volume role as a rookie. And that's going to have me intrigued.
Yeah. All right, Tyler, one last turbo situation from yourself before we get out.
I'm just going to utilize this to continue to grandstand on Jackson Dart. He's a very fun, interesting, volatile player, and he's the type of guy I like to draft in best ball because the offensive line is a little shaky. This is a quarterback room that every guy that's ever stepped foot in Dayball's quarterback room has been utilized with design rushes and scrambles. Those are good for fantasy. Jackson Dart did that very well in college. And from a vertical standpoint, they have Neighbors and they have Slayton on the outside who have both been, very cromulent to above average perimeter guys, as well as you've got your short outlets in Wandale and Neighbors on short stuff. And from that standpoint, we have seen what Russ and Winston are. This is a coach and GM on the hot seat. So it's just, if you're going to give me Jackson Dart, who basically goes 17th, 18th round undrafted sometimes, as a 3rd quarterback stacked up to be, like Drew Lock won someone $1 million on DraftKings last year because of just chuck it to Neighbors and let it roll. So if Drew Lock can do that, what can Jackson Dart do for you? I think to me, goes to a quarterback whisperer who's gotten the most out of every piece of shit he has seen at quarterback. And Jackson Dart doesn't have to be good to be very good for fantasy. And I like it when the bar is low to be useful to hit my lineup.
Yeah, I think Jackson Dart is one of those players that, like, last year I wasn't necessarily expecting Bo Nix to be particularly fantasy relevant in his first year. And just the ability to add that kind of scrambling and to make some plays. Maybe I was wrong enough about Bo Nix, but I'm approaching Jackson Dart a little more interested than I could have been. For me, he kind of screams 3 QB builds only. I don't really want to pair him with somebody like Lamar or Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen, but I can very much get on board with him. Rich, I'll just let you quickly go on Jackson Dart. Are you any interest there whatsoever?
None at all. I don't like him as a prospect. I don't think he can process. I don't think he was ever asked to process in college. And when you spend multiple years in an offense and still don't understand where your check down is, where to go with the ball if things break down, it raises alarm bells. I don't get what the hell the Giants are doing. As you said, they're coaching on the hot sheet, and I think he basically needs to sit for a year, if not two. And I worry that they're going to throw him into the fire after like 6 weeks, and he's just going to crash and burn. So I want no parts of it. Maybe, as Tyler said, in best ball, 3 QB builds, I can get it, but yeah, I'd rather not.
Yeah, definitely. I understand that one. And
They said the
obviously,
same thing about Josh Allen his rookie year, and he was QB 10.
Yeah, but he was guaranteed to start.
Justin Herbert wasn't supposed to start, and then Tyrod Taylor's lung was punctured. So can we get the same doctor to New York? And
he's going to have to do 2 because there's Russ and Jameis. There's both guys. He's got to punch your lungs off first.
2 hands, 2 darts. There we go.
Well, there we go. We've kind of tried to get through as much as we possibly could tonight. We're going to try and do these more often, check in and sort of like talk through where we're at on certain players for the upcoming season. No best ball draft tonight, but of course, if you want to check out Tyler's stream from last night, the guys were live, the Trifle Tower. Obviously, Monday, myself and Tyler were live as well. And Tyler, you'll be back on Monday. I will not, as I move house. Rich, you put out your Superflex Dynasty rankings yesterday. People should go and check that video out. There's a lot of very smart stuff in there. And we'll have more content coming your way over the coming days. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us tonight. This is a lot of fun. And we'll catch you all again very soon.